We're moving on to the escalating crisis in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron and Russian leader Vladimir Putin have agreed to work towards a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. The announcement follows a phone call held between the two leaders in which they agreed on the need to a diplomatic solution. During the call, Putin reiterated to Macron that Russian troops would leave Ukraine after they had finished military exercises. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence is playing a different tune. According to a CBS report, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken insists Russia's threat to Ukraine is deadly serious and that Putin has already given orders for Russian troops to invade Ukraine. So to make sense of this war of words, I'm joined by journalist and author Daniel Lazar in New York. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Daniel, what is U.S. intelligence basing this claim on? We've seen the U.S. predict a supposed D-Day for February 16th and then the 20th, and that's now long gone.
We have no idea. There's no evidence that's presented, merely the word of the intelligence agencies. I don't believe it for a second. I mean, I think that that for Putin to invade the Ukraine would be a desperate last gasp measure, and he's not nearly at that point at this moment. Russia has no plans to invade the Ukraine. The great danger is that the conflict in the eastern provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk may get out of hand, thereby providing the U.S. with a pretext to impose draconian sanctions on Russia. But there's no imminent threat of a Russian invasion, I'm convinced.
We can see Macron trying to de-escalate the situation while the U.S. and the U.K. are continuing with a warmongering. What is behind this rhetoric?
Well, first of all, I mean, Boris Johnson is a desperate man, a man holding on to power by his fingernails, therefore desperate to drum up some kind of war fever that he thinks will keep him in office a while longer. But it's obviously a last gasp measure. And Biden's in very bad shape also. I mean, his polls are scraping the bottom. His legislative program is in ruins. His popularity is plummeting. So therefore, he wants also to provoke some kind of confrontation as well. He's also desperate to stop Nord Stream 2 and to essentially herd Germany back into the under the umbrella of NATO. He's very disturbed that Germany may be heading out in its own direction with regard to this crisis.
We're seeing refugees from the Donbass region fleeing to Russia, and the republics are asking Russia to accept their status as independent republics. How likely is this situation to go under the same as it did with the Crimean scenario?
I mean, there was some kind of attempt by Russia to grab hold of and absorb Donetsk and Luhansk. I think there's a very slim chance of that. That'd be a highly provocative move, which would trigger the most intense sanctions by the U.S., and therefore it's not something that Putin is likely to do.
In his call with Macron, Putin insisted his troops would only withdraw once they finished their military drills. With so much pressure and all eyes on him, how will the Russian leader manage this diplomatic crisis?
He's actually doing a very good job of it so far. I mean, the U.S. has responded with absolute hysteria to his troop movements. Certainly, he has succeeded in pushing the question of NATO expansion, of putting it back on the table. So he's made NATO understand that Russia has certain concerns which it really wants to have addressed, and there is, I think, probably growing sentiment in NATO that Russia may have a point. And I think that all Putin has to do is just sort of sit back and watch while the U.S. works itself up into a high pitch of hysteria. But as I said before, the danger is that the local conflict in the East may get out of hand somehow and therefore blow up into something much bigger and more dangerous.
Johnson was quoted saying this is the worst military conflict since 1945. There's been an exchange of fire, but this has been going on and off since 2014. Why has this gone unnoticed until now?
Because it's not true. I mean, Johnson is a desperate man, and his rhetoric is absurd. I mean, the greatest confrontation since 1945. I mean, remember, the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968. They invaded Hungary in 1956. The U.S. waged a war on Vietnam from 1964 to 75. This rhetoric is completely out of control, and it's self-defeating because essentially people are going to stop believing this kind of silly hysteria mongering that's flowing out of London and Washington. The U.S. and British governments are really making fools of themselves in this case.
Daniel, how can we de-escalate the situation? Where are we going from here?
Well, I think that what should be done is that the status of the Ukraine should be as a topic of conversation between the EU and Russia. I think that some kind of neutrality or Finlandization might be a very good option for the Ukraine. I mean, after all, Finlandization led to one of the most prosperous and democratic countries on the face of the earth. So it's hardly a bad fate for the Ukraine. And meanwhile, highly provocative actions, such as the deployment of NATO missiles in Poland and Romania, should be rethought, reconsidered. Those missiles are there supposedly to defend against the danger of an Iranian missile attack, but no one takes that seriously. So the U.S. and NATO are engaging in needlessly provocative actions in those countries, and Russia has genuine concerns, which I think should be addressed in an honest and forthright manner.
Journalist and author Daniel Lazare, thank you so much for joining us tonight with your insight. Have a good night.